everyone, I'm Captain Logan.
And I am Dan.
And welcome to another exciting podcast, another exciting random impromptu podcast. Dan and I were just chatting on Skype and decided, like we did a few years ago now, Dan, with Ninja Turtles, hey, there's a thing we're talking about anyway. We might as well record some of this conversation and put it on the channel. And Dan and I are talking about some of our frustrations with modern comics. We'll try not to make this the most negative thing in the world, but we were just discussing some of the headaches and things that we don't really care for about modern comics. And I thought it would be interesting to get Dan's perspective because Dan is not in any way right now really qualified to talk about this. And so I thought it would be fun to get him on talking about it. Dan has not been, I'm just kidding, Dan has not been reading regular comics lately with the exception of some trades here and there, and he finally just this week went to his comic shop and got pulls and started getting regular books again. Now you've got a real limited pull list number, Dan.
Yeah, I had dropped out of the monthly comic book thing for like 3 years. I think right before Secret Wars was when I stopped buying every week, and that was like, what, 2015?
Yeah, you had stopped even, I think, quite a bit before that.
Yeah, so I dropped off for a while, and I had been reading like Charles Soule's Daredevil. I had been reading a lot of the Marvel Star Wars stuff in trade, and I have the first 2 volumes of Aaron's Doctor Strange. And I haven't read those yet, but I've been mainly going back through the Marvel catalog and reading some of the old stuff. Like I'm hip deep in the Stanley Jack Kirby run on Thor right now, which is really great. But yeah, I've been trying to jump back in because I kind of missed it. I miss the kind of, going to the store every week and, anticipating what's coming out. And I don't know. I've limited myself to like 5-6 titles, and honestly, like I kind of had trouble finding 5 or 6 books to put on the poll in the first place. Like, I'm happy with what I have, but just looking at the solicits, I was like, I don't know, like, neither of these lines really interest me all that much. The stuff that I'm picking up is Aquaman, The Flash, Astonishing X-Men, Daredevil, what else? Doctor Strange, and what's the last one? I'm trying to remember. Well, there's a 6th one. That I guess that speaks to how much of an impact it left on me.
Defenders?
Defenders, yeah, the Bendis book. So yeah, those are the 6 I've sort of caught up on the early issues of the most current arcs and have been reading moving forward. Yeah, I think Daredevil is the one I've enjoyed the most because it's the least sort of event-driven tie-in of all of them. And it's just kind of like Charles Soule getting to tell a long-form story, like in a serialized fashion. Like I like comics, that's what I like them for. Doctor Strange is really tie into Secret Empire right now, and all I hear about that event is negative stuff, and I have no interest in reading it. So like that's a little weird for me. One of the things that made me like drop off was really event fatigue, because one of the, like, just to put it into context for people, like JMS, when he left Thor, he really complained hard about how whenever they would ask him to tie into events in books, he would have to spend like 6 months building up to the story that he didn't want to tell, and then spend 6 months cleaning up from the story he didn't want to tell. And like now that we're doing crossovers every 6 months, and even more frequently depending on what character you're talking about, like if you're the X-Men and you're involved in the big 2 crossover events every 6 months, and you have a family tie-in crossover, like we're not even giving these writers the freedom to tell the stories they want to tell, I feel. I mean, maybe it's different like behind the scenes, like they're all like skippy doodah about tying into these events, but it really feels like their stories get derailed and I don't get to read the story that they want to tell me most of the time.
Yeah, and a lot of the folks that have left, a lot of their old heavy hitters that are mostly doing creator-owned stuff now, like Remender, like Hickman, you hear complain quite a bit about that, and that seems to be the main reason that some of those guys left. I haven't heard that from Hickman, but I imagine he probably also had that. I've seen Remender complain about it.
Yeah, Remender complains about it on Twitter sometimes. That and the fact that he felt like, it's kind of the classic thing where you're working on characters that you don't own, and like anything you create in the Marvel Universe, like, can be used by anyone without your sort of seal or approval. You don't get compensated for it. They can use it in a movie, make $1 billion off of it, and you get no credit for it.
Yeah.
Like if you read interviews with like Roy Thomas when he worked at Marvel in the 70s, he was like, I knew that I wouldn't get compensated for any of these characters, so I never created a new one, which like it's pretty stifling creatively. Even though he did create he did quote unquote create like a lot of characters in his Avengers run, like the Vision and stuff like that. They were made out of already existing concepts, so it was technically stuff that was created by creators before him, but he didn't create anything new. And I think a lot of the creators still feel like they have to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and of course that's the reason that McFarlane and Gaiman and those guys ran off and made Image.
Right, yeah.
In the 90s, and this remains a problem, and arguably it's even worse of a problem than it was back then because there's so much money to be made in movies now, now that this is a bazillion-dollar industry. But with regards to the idea of not being able to make up new characters, I mean, like this is, as you and I have talked about before, a huge problem with X-Men right now. That not only as a writer would you maybe not want to make up new characters because you're not going to get compensated for them, and then you've got your hands tied behind your back because you're just stuck with whatever editorial will let you use, but they wouldn't let you make up new characters right now anyway. Because they don't want Fox to be able to use them for films, or at least that's my understanding. That seems to be what's been going on with X-Men the last couple 3 years.
Multiple X-Men creators have come out and said that, including Chris Claremont. Like,
okay,
they're not even letting.
I'm glad you have a source for that, because I have read about that, but I wasn't sure if anybody was actually coming out and talking about it.
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago. Chris Claremont, when he was writing some of the Periphery X books for Marvel, he did some little stints on them. He was like, yeah, in the X office, there's kind of a thing where you're not allowed to create new characters because, Fox gets first dibs at the film rights, which, like, to tie the hands of Chris Claremont, the guy that, like, created all of the staying popular, iconic X-Men characters besides the ones that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby introduced, is, like, insane to me. Like, I don't know why you would shackle that guy with that kind of stuff. But anyway, that for a while was the case with the Spider Office too. The people who were doing Spider-Gwen said that if they had an idea for a character they wanted to introduce, they would have to sort of make a new like a Spider-Gwen universe version of an existing character and sort of graft what they wanted to make that character as onto that name.
Which they've gotten really creative with. And sometimes that kind of that becomes almost like a minimalistic thing where you have an assignment and you can only play with the toys in the toolbox, and they're in the toy box, mixed metaphor, and then something really interesting comes out of it. But at the same time, that's not exactly fair.
No, certainly not. And like, I don't know, it's cool to like see alternate versions of these characters that are different and interesting, but at the same time, like, you could be creating the next new popular character that would be popular enough to sustain their own film or whatever. I think it's a very short-sighted approach to limit the creators in that way. I mean, I guess that's sort of the point. They don't want Sony and Fox to be able to make money off of the things that are created there. But like, I don't know.
But when that kind of business gets and bureaucracy, politics gets mixed in so hard. You're already in a world where arguably so many things are played out, and you have to get really, really creative to keep it fresh. I mean, like, obviously I love superheroes and I love comics, but it's getting harder and harder to make things fresh and do things that either haven't been done or that you can do in such a way where they feel brand new again. And because we've been doing this for so many years now. There's so many decades of this stuff, and especially in a place like Marvel where we don't reboot and all the continuity stays the way it always was. I know we had Secret Wars, but it wasn't a true reboot, and everything still seems to kind of count. So you're already really challenged. And then, and sometimes that can be a really cool, interesting challenge. But you and I have talked a lot, Dan, about how there are a lot of decisions that seem to be made sometimes because it's never been done before, so it's a good idea. Like that might sound like the dumbest thing ever 20 years ago, but it's never happened, so we better try that.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think is really strange about my criticisms are mainly about Marvel, and I bet most of this conversation will be about that because that's like my wheelhouse. Marvel. I like a few of the DC characters and have read them. Like the Flash and Aquaman are my two favorites, but I don't have nearly the amount of investment I have in DC as I do in Marvel. It's just a taste thing, and I know I'm not saying the DC characters aren't as great or anything like that, but like I just like the Marvel characters more. And one of the things that frustrated me about Marvel's line for a while was like, when I was reading them, it was like corporate synergy with the movies where like they weren't even treating the comics as like pioneering new stories to be used as threads in the movies. It was just kind of like, oh, like Thanos shows up in the post-credit sequence of this movie, so we're going to do a Thanos event that, you know, is about the Inhumans because they're going to make that into a TV show, almost to like advertise the upcoming properties they have in the movies for like the comic book people. But it's like, if you're a Marvel Comics fan, like who isn't going to go see that stuff in the first place anyway? You know,
I've never understood that synergy thing.
Like, I would think they'd want to be telling new stories that they would be able to adapt in the movies in the future. Like, most of the stuff that they've adapted, especially in the Captain America movies, is really recent stuff. Like, that's all Brubaker's run and then Civil War. So,
yeah, and that's gotten a little bit better. It still remains it's not as bad as, I can't remember which one, because we've had so many events now. I think it was the event that was about the Red Skull and going after the stuff we did with Avengers, or with Uncanny Avengers.
Was it Axis, that thing?
Was it, yeah, Axis? If memory serves, that was the event that just months before Age of Ultron comes out has to have Tony Stark build a new kind of Sentinel that goes evil and goes crazy and kills things. Because we're about to do that with Ultron, and that drove me crazy. We haven't been seeing as much of that, but we sure are, like greenlighting books, of course, based on whatever is big or about to come out and stuff. And I honestly, that's not always a problem. I mean, like I can certainly understand why you might want to try to like use characters that people are interested in right now to sell books and then tell cool stories with them. I don't have a problem with that. But Marvel right now has way too many books in general. And B, sometimes it does seem like just an advertisement for whatever's going on right now. Like, I don't know. I resisted the idea of a Baby Groot ongoing.
Yeah, that's really weird.
I think it was ongoing. I'm not sure. Honestly, I'm a little out of the loop with some of the Marvel stuff because there's so much of it. Like, I can't keep up with it. It's really oversaturated. And I think that's part of why they've been in trouble the last few months.
I think it's that, and they might have the opposite problem, at least with their core cast of characters. I think, like, you know, they're trying to make not Miss Marvel, she's called Captain Marvel now, thing in the comics because, like, they're going to do a movie with that, and, like, I know she has, like, her, like, you know, fan. I just don't think she has the staying power and popularity as a lot of their core characters, and, like, I think their problem now is, like, they're trying to sell to a new generation of people. We can talk about, like, many of the ways they've tried to, like, pick up a new demographic, because I think they're very misguided about it. But, like, they replaced all of their core cast of characters because, like, the perception was they were all white dudes or something. And then, like, you go and see the movie, like, if you're a new comic reader and you like Marvel and you go see the movies and you're a fan of, like, you know, choose any one of them. You're a fan of Thor, you're a fan of Captain America, you're a fan of Hulk, you're a fan of any of these characters. Like, you go into a comic shop, like, oh, you know, Thor is currently a chick, and Bruce Banner isn't the Hulk, and Steve Rogers is a Nazi. Like, they don't at all resemble what the characters from the movie are like, even in spirit, or like, because they're not even the same people.
Yeah, it used to be that the status quo when a movie would come out in the comics would have to be whatever that movie was, even if just before it was like radically different. We've gotten away from that, and I don't know, maybe that's not exactly a problem. I think this is a very complicated subject right now, Dan, because I don't think Marvel knows what they're doing.
I don't know. I think a lot of the talent that they brought in to fill the void just doesn't stack up to the people they had working there before, and that's no
that's right.
Shot at, like, some of the people that are working there. I am enjoying some of the stuff going on there. Like I said, Daredevil's great. I really like that stuff. But even, like, some of the artwork I've seen on their books doesn't even, like, stack up to the quality of like when I was reading stuff. I feel like it doesn't seem like a lot of the, like, A-listers want to work at Marvel right now, and, like, I've seen editorially a lot of weird stuff, like, in letters pages, like, people talking about comics being the medium for, like, political revolution. I'm like, dude, like you are having delusions of grandeur. You sell 10,000 copies a month. Come on, you know, like it's just very strange.
And it feels like they're trying too hard. I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have political stories and that we can't talk about that kind of stuff in comics, but it sort of feels like that company the last couple of years has patted itself on the back too much for that, and they almost feel kind of elitist where they're like, okay, DC has gone back to making comics mostly for their old base, so we'll try to aim just at the younger base, and they're losing their diehards. And I think that's kind of a mistake. I mean, and if you're publishing that many titles, you can kind of do both.
Yeah, like it's a lot of, they're really going for like the vocal minority of people on Twitter that complained about like problematic things in Marvel's comics, and I think like the Twitter mobs are a farce because I don't think they're representative of the majority of people at all. I think, and this is one of the representations of that. I think like all the people complaining about the various things that they thought was wrong with Marvel before this new initiative, like I don't know, man, like. The fact that their sales have tanked, I think, is a demonstration that they're not the majority. If maybe those people that complain about these things don't even really care to read the comics. It's just like, oh, like it's cool to see that Wolverine's a chick now, and that's like representative or whatever. Like
I agree with you, but I'm not saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I also don't think that you're saying that we shouldn't have diversity in comics.
No, of course not. I would like them to create new characters in addition to the characters that we already know and love.
As opposed to replacing everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think about all the time, like, I was talking...
And we should mention, because of, like, when we're recording this, Dan and I are well aware that they're now trying to compensate for that with the legacy thing. But we'll see what they do with that and how it sticks. Like, it doesn't seem like Rebirth, where it took them a long time, but DC finally learned their lesson and understood why their product lines weren't selling the way they wanted them to and why it wasn't resonating with people, and they kind of got themselves into gear and they started just telling better stories. I don't think that's what... Marvel's not at that place yet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, I had this conversation with you over text once where I was thinking about, like, which of my favorite classic Marvel stories would not be able to be told at the current climate in Marvel. And I'm thinking about, like, Giant Size X-Men #1, where Chris Claremont introduced all of these, like, characters from around the world, a variety of ethnic backgrounds, male, female, like, all different kinds of people. You've got Storm, you've got Colossus, you've got Nightcrawler, you have...
Oh, yeah, X-Men was the TOS of Marvel.
Yeah, exactly. And, like, it wasn't like that before, you know, excuse me, that wasn't Chris Claremont that wrote that. I think it was Dave Cockrum did the art, and I forget who was the writer on that. But anyway, in any case, like, my point is that, like, we're not creating new characters possibly because of the perception that, like, it's too big of a risk. Like, oh, we create a new character and we try to... you know, like, we create this new character and if they're not popular and it's a dud, like, it's a waste of time or something. And I guess the perception is, like, if you put a different character in, like, an already established mantle, it'll sell more. But, like, I don't know that has demonstrated...
That doesn't seem to be working. And the thing is, we've seen that at DC especially happen quite a bit for years, but they always stagger it. It's always, like, one book will have that and everybody else is the same. Or we'll take some major players off the grid all at once, but they usually still would have the same books. I'm thinking about, like, Justice League in the early '90s, where like the Justice League characters were still around, but the Justice League wasn't them. We would do things like that, and we would, and obviously you had, you know, Dick Grayson as Batman a decade ago, and you had World Without Superman after Death of Superman and stuff like that. But they always, and you've had a multitude of Batgirls, but again, we always stagger it, and it doesn't feel so agenda driven.
Yeah, I agree, and, like, I don't know, my thing with the DC Legacy Heroes is, like, I like most of those characters more than the original mantle holders, so, like, I guess I'm hypocritical in the sense that, like, I like Wally Westberg as the Flash, I like Kyle Rayner as Green Lantern, I like a lot of those characters that came out of, and Dick Grayson as a character in general more than Bruce Wayne. I guess I like those teen characters because they felt a little bit more like Marvel characters to me, where they were, like, flawed, had problems, and, like, they grew and changed over time. Mark Waid's run on the Flash, Jeff Johns' run on the Flash, like the classic runs in that character, and for me, made Wally West the definitive version of that character for me. Like, I don't know. I think you can make an argument for Miles Morales being like the definitive version of Spider-Man for people that haven't read any Spider-Man before Ben did that, because Miles Morales is a great character and those stories are great. But
yeah, some of it's just about the attitude, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, about doing so much of it all at once, because I want to be a little bit careful about some of the stuff or some of the characters we're talking about, because I, for one, am not lumping everybody together. So, like, Jane Foster Thor is really interesting.
That's a great idea. Yeah, like I was reading some of the Journey into Mystery issues from Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's run, and there's this kind of plot thread that pops up in one of them where Thor is trying to marry Jane Foster, and Odin is like, no, like you can't marry someone that's not immortal. Like she'll have to earn it, like prove herself worthy of immortality, just like you had to with the hammer and stuff. And I think that's the story that Jason Aaron's telling. I think that's a brilliant idea because he goes all the way back to like the beginning of Thor and like is picking up on plot threads and stuff. See, that's natural.
I think Jason Aaron, bear with me when I say this, Dan. I think Jason Aaron might be accidentally, kind of like indirectly responsible for some of Marvel's tactics in this. When he says that wasn't a mandate and that it was an idea he had going all the way back, and that he was always building toward that, I believe him 100%.
Yeah, I do too, because he seeds it in his issues, like the one with Jane Foster where we find out she has cancer and she's hanging out with Thor, like out in space and stuff, and they're like having what looks like the last conversation they'll have with the two of them while she's alive. Like that was all seeded.
That was a brilliant scene. But yeah, Aaron, and I'm not just like reading between the lines, having seen him say that in letters pages and things. I mean, I have talked to him personally about this, and I've looked him right in the eye, and I believe him. And then you had all this other stuff came after it.
Yeah, I think that and Miles Morales were the two real catalysts for it.
Sure. But the difference is with Miles Morales, of course, we had him in a different universe for like 4 years.
Yeah, true. It's just, I think Marvel has taken this tact in general with like a lot of the things in the past. Like one thing is really successful, let's do it to every book.
Right.
Like remember when Astonishing X-Men was a big thing, and then everyone had an Astonishing title for like 3 months? Yeah,
and you know what sucks about that? It's really sad because, okay, I've had this conversation with a lot of people lately, and I feel like this even came up in another video recently. Why is it that if one company is in a really great place, that's when the other one has to drop off?
It's really cyclical. It's strange, isn't it?
It's really bizarre. And the mistakes they're making right now are almost as baffling, some of them as baffling, as what DC was doing 5 years ago. And as counterintuitive. And I just kept scratching my monkey cranium going, what in the world is DC doing right now? And why are they tying the hands of their creators behind their backs? And why are they running people off? And here's the difference. Because I want to play fair here. I'm reading way more Marvel titles right now than I was 52 titles. So like editorial has not gotten to a place yet where nobody's allowed to tell good stories. We're not in that and ever tell their own stories. We're not in that place. But the event fatigue thing is a massive problem. And like forcing out characters that we like, that people probably want to write about, and doing this gimmicky thing where we do create a new character, but we just put it in somebody else's book. Like, okay, if you want Ironheart, if you want Riri Williams, fine, give her a book called Ironheart. Why is she in a book called Iron Man? It doesn't even match up. She's not a man. I don't understand.
Yeah, it's very weird.
And I know there's probably some people that are going to give me flack for that and be like, well, why can't she be in Iron Man's book? Like, well, because she should have her own book.
Yeah,
but then obviously the conventional wisdom is, well, it won't sell. But like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't think false advertising is the way to go.
Well, I mean, I don't know. The comic book industry, I guess, is very different than the way it was in the 60s in the sense that, like, you know, comic books don't sell nearly the amount of copies they used to. Right. But, like...
Some of that is because of how many of them there are, though.
Yeah, true. But, like, my point is, like, Iron Man himself was not a guaranteed seller when he came out, and he wasn't even a guaranteed seller until the movie came out.
And even then, Iron Man has never sold great. I mean, Fraction's run did better probably than anything. As far as I understand it, although I haven't looked at all the numbers. But like Eric has told me about this is coming from Eric, but Eric's looked into some of the sales figures and has told me that Iron Man's never sold all that well, and so I don't know. I guess I understand the logic of like a peripheral other Iron Man character isn't going to sell well, but it seems like that character was created to sell that book.
Yeah, it's very weird.
And again, as you said earlier, obviously it's just not working.
Yeah, and like I think some of these things could work. Like Ryu Williams, I don't know anything about that character. I'm not interested in reading Iron Man in general.
Yeah.
Like let alone that character. So
yeah, and we don't have to just go to Riri. It's if you're gonna have a Doctor Doom book, have a Doctor Doom book.
Yeah.
There's no reason for him to be in an Iron Man suit, and that is the most contrived thing.
Yeah.
And it's a great book. I mean, I like it a lot, and I really wanted to see what Doctor Doom was going to be doing after Secret Wars, because he's the most interesting thing in that. Like, Doctor Doom recreates the world in his own image. It's great. It's fascinating.
And I'm going to predict to you that the new trend is going to be Marvel giving hero titles to their villains, because it's already been announced that Loki's going to be the new Sorcerer Supreme. So.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. Potentially interesting idea. It depends on how it's executed, I guess. Because I love, obviously, Doctor Strange. I love Loki, but like I don't know if those things two necessarily go together.
Well, and you've hit on something interesting, Dan. You want so much to look at these all on a case by case basis, but when you can see that there's this when you can see the seams of the business side of this. And obviously, this is a really commercial industry, so you're going to see some of that anyway. But when you can see the seams where it seems to be a synergy thing, and we have decisions being made sometimes almost across the board, it is difficult to take them on a case by case sometimes, even if some of them work really well and some of them don't. Where you're just like, okay, everybody's got to be like this one way, or we have to replace everybody. I don't know. It's just we did it with Hulk at the same time as we did this character and this character and this character.
Yeah, and I think it's a tough line to walk, right? Because we've been talking about how we're not pleased with like them, swapping the mantles of all their characters at the same time. But I don't think that's like a bad idea at face value to do with a character if the story you're telling warrants that, like with Jason Aaron's Thor. And like I don't think giving the title of a hero to a villain is necessarily a bad idea at face value either. It's just a matter of like, I don't want creators to be hamstringed by like some sort of mandate from up top where like this is a popular thing now and we've got to do it. Maybe I've just like gotten to the point that I feel like a lot of comic book fans get to, where like you become a grumpy old jaded comic book fan when you begin to see the seams.
Yeah.
And like when you're in a different way than you did like when you first started reading, when you were all like bright-eyed and look at all the comic books, these are so much fun.
Yeah, the magic wears off.
I mean, which is kind of a sad thing to say. I mean, I don't want the magic to wear off, because I honestly do love the medium. I love these characters. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here talking about them. I don't know. It's just a matter of like.
I'm just saying, you've seen that happen to people.
Yeah.
Where the magic seems to wear off for them.
Exactly.
I'm not speaking for myself in particular. I know I say this about everything. It's a case by case thing. There are characters where that seems to happen for a minute, and then I just wait until somebody else gets on it.
Yeah.
And until a company decides to change their tack, corporation wide, which seems to happen. I mean, we have relaunches as often as Spider-Man has had reboots now.
That's a thing that I think is another problem for me personally, is it's like the line-wide relaunches where we're switching up all the creative teams and like relaunching the books with all the new number ones and renumbering books back to the original numbering and stuff. It's like I think about like all of the best Marvel stories that I love from back in the day, and they're all like really long runs. Like that's the thing that I think is difficult about getting into Marvel as opposed to DC. Like, if you ask someone like what the best Superman and Batman stories are, the best Wonder Woman stories, Like, you can recommend like All-Star Superman. Like, it's a 12-issue book. They publish it all in one trade paperback. Boom. That's like a really great self-contained Superman story you can read. Same thing with like the Dark Knight Returns, Year One, like all that stuff. How Long Halloween. With Marvel, all of this, the classic run, like stuff with these characters, the stories are like 10-year runs on these characters, and that's what I like about Marvel, is how serialized it is, and like how long form the stories are, and how the plots build. Like, Claremont wrote X-Men for like 17 years, and like seeded stuff like 4 years out and stuff. It was nuts when he knew he was going to be on the book for a long time. And I don't know, with all these relaunches and reshufflings and trying to get new readers to, and like changing the way the entire line looks all the time, I feel like writers can't do those kind of things anymore. Like, well, there are a select few, but like,
and it's worse than that, because we will sometimes try to have our cake and eat it too, where we'll do both at once, and it'll be disastrous.
Yeah.
So you'll have, and this happened, of course, the obvious go-to for this, of course, is Batman Incorporated. But you had this with Marvel stuff, like a little bit here and there, even over Secret Wars. Although I don't think it really affected Jason Aaron's Thor. Like, I think he's been able to pretty much tell the story he was going to tell, regardless of going over that. But when you go back and you look at Morrison's Batman, I mean, like, you've got a run like that has to not only go across a relaunch, as far as like the business strategy goes, but a reboot where some of the characters he's using don't even come from the same places and have the same origins anymore, and he's still trying to tell his story. But now, like, Batman's in his 52 suit, and everybody's talking about all the crazy 52 stuff that's going on, and it doesn't match up anymore. You hit on something, Dan, that makes me realize that, because every time you and I talk comics, I feel like you have a tendency to kind of emphasize our differences in me and you personally, and what we like in comics. But I don't think we're as far removed as you think we are. Because what's really interesting is, and of course, when people ask you Marvel versus DC, you say Marvel. When people ask me that question, I say Batman, and that's always been the case. But of course, I also like Superman probably more than I like anything in Marvel, also. But I like Marvel as a brand and a universe before I like any particular character in it over anybody else, which is the big difference with Marvel versus DC for me. Where for me, I'm there for a character, but. Interestingly, you brought up the quick stories you can hand people where they don't need to have seen anything else, or there isn't anything else in that world with DC, and of course there's a whole lot of that. But those are never my favorite stories. Interestingly, the stories I like most in DC are the big long form things that go on a long time, just like you have with Marvel.
Yeah, and of course, since they've been publishing the serialized thing for a while. And I think DC, after Crisis, they tried to capture a little bit of the Marvel magic, where they weren't just doing like one and done stories like they did in the Silver Age, and they had like ongoing plots that weaved through all the books, and like the status quo had changed and stuff. But yeah, like, I know one of your favorite things is like No Man's Land and like Death and Return of Superman, and that lasted for a number of years too. So yeah, there's definitely stuff there. I just feel like it's harder to get people into the Marvel characters rather than just telling them, like, pick up the most recent issue at the store or something. Like, if I tell people, like, oh, I'm a Hulk fan, like, I want to get into the Hulk, I'm like, well, like, you're gonna have to buy like 12 trade paperbacks. 8 of them are in a series of trade paperbacks that don't exist anymore, and then they started printing them in a different way. And it's really confusing, and like, they haven't put it all out in trade yet. Like, that's Peter David's run on Hulk,
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I think what you'll hear a lot of diehard comics people say, especially store owners, because they want to get new people into comics and they want it to sound easier sometimes than maybe it is.
Yeah.
You'll hear a lot of veteran comics readers saying, don't worry about the history, you'll be able to catch up just reading it. That just jump in on wherever anybody is right now, and you'll be confused for an issue or two, but as you go, recaps will happen and things will become clear to you. There is some truth to that. You know what the problem with that logic is? I think that was true in the 80s. I think it is less true now for the reason you stated earlier, which is, if we're constantly relaunching and taking things back to number one all the time, then you might be you might be in on a status quo with a character for all of 8 or 9 issues if you just jumped on and you're just starting to figure it out, and now we change everything again.
Yeah, exactly. I can only imagine what it was like for people that were like really hardcore into the New 52 after like 5 years of that, and then that had never read comic books before, because that was like the big thing DC touted. They were like, we're getting all these people that had never read comics before to come in and read the New 52, and the sales didn't sustain over the long term, but I would imagine there were at least a few people that jumped in with the New 52, hadn't read a comic book before, and then Rebirth happens.
There were, but man, the difference is, and I know you haven't read a whole lot of it, Rebirth has been as organic in a transition as humanly possible.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, they've been real good about it. Rebirth is not a reboot. It's another rebranding effort, most certainly, and we brought back some things from the old universes, and Superman has kind of screwed the pooch on it. Superman is we started off in a really cool place, and I'm still liking some things with Superman, but it's the one thing that did get a straight up reboot, but 20 issues in. Where I don't know if you have I told you about this. I don't know if you know about this, but
I've heard some people talk about, because like I asked a bunch of people on the Geekvolution Facebook page like what's worth reading now, and very little of what they recommended appealed to my sensibilities personally. Like I'm sure like they're enjoying those books and they're great, but someone was trying to recommend the Superman book to me, and I was like, I have no interest in that premise at all.
Well, what Jurgens has done to Superman, and this sucks because I was giving Jurgens a lot of praise toward the end of 52 and at the beginning of Rebirth, because I thought Lois and Clark was a cool premise, and he's not the best writer in the world, but I liked a lot of what he was doing with that, and I loved the statement he was making with bringing over the Superman I grew up with and saying, I'm sorry, but the Superman we have right now is not Superman. We have to get rid of him and replace him with real Superman. That was a bold statement. And like at the risk of just replacing things with nostalgia, which I don't think is exactly what that was, I really like that idea. The problem is, what we've done now is replaced everything with nostalgia. Jurgens fixed it, and then he broke it again in an attempt to continue to fix it, because he wants to get us back to something more reminiscent of regular Superman status quo. The problem is, out of 52, toward the end of that, Superman's alias was outed, and everybody knew that Clark Kent was Superman. And then he kills off Superman, the 52 Superman, and we have old Jurgens from the universe I grew up with, who actually died Superman, there with Lois from that universe and his new kid, and he's got to replace that Superman. So how do you make him Clark Kent again? Everybody knows Clark Kent is Superman. Like, what do you do? So you know what he did? He just brought in Mixoplick, and he had him arbitrarily merge the universes, and as you go along now, you just kind of find out what counts and what doesn't. And it's awful. Like, it just doesn't work. Well, and I mean, like, some of the revamps with 52, with Superman, I mean, Superman was kind of one of the better things that was handled in 52, or at least Superman's side of the universe.
I think at the beginning it was much better than it was later on, from what I read.
Well, but I'm not, again, that's why I amended this. I'm not saying that character, I'm saying that pocket of the universe. Because I'm a Krypton fan before I'm a Superman fan, and I like 52 Krypton a lot.
Yeah, and what they did with Brainiac was real cool in Morrison's run. I really like that take on Brainiac.
Yeah, but we got rid of that immediately. Like 52 retconned that Brainiac as fast as it possibly could.
Really? Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
That's
anytime
crazy.
Anybody's used Brainiac after that, he's real traditional, old school, everything you always think of with Brainiac. We didn't continue to use Morrison's interesting Brainiac.
That's really dumb.
No, it sucks. One of the things that was really cool was, because I was reading Supergirl, was Zor-El as Cyborg Superman. Well, at the beginning of, and this is the one big place where I feel like they didn't have their ducks in a row and the wires were crossed. At least in stuff that I've read, because I haven't read everything. But we opened Rebirth with when the Supergirl book started, which I stopped reading because I don't like it. It's too much like the TV show status quo. They introduced like National City as a place, and I just don't want that to be in comics. I always thought that was really dumb, and I don't like the name of it. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. they bring in Zor-El Cyborg Superman, and when they did the big stage, live pitch thing, and they were talking about that book, a lot of people got really upset that they gave away that Zor-El was Cyborg Superman, because they thought that was a brand new thing for Rebirth, and didn't realize that no, Supergirl has done that for 2 years, and he's not giving away anything. That's what it's been. And then Jurgens merges the universes, and Death of Superman happened, and that Cyborg Superman is around now, so I guess we have two? And I'm not sure if Zor-El Cyborg Superman even happened now, because I'm not reading that book, but it's possible that they retconned some of the first arc of Supergirl. I don't know. But it's real McFarlane Spawn, where they pick and choose now what counts and what doesn't, and it's obnoxious. So anyway, I don't remember how I got on that.
That's sort of similar to what's going on in The Flash. There's this. I'm not privy to what Williamson has been doing on the book before issue 25, but I quite liked the issues I read because I thought there was some cool character stuff, and interpersonal relationship dynamics with Barry and Iris and a bunch of the other characters in the Flash book. But like the Reverse Flash is going after Barry Allen this time because he since he's like a time traveler. And can like travel between dimensions and stuff just like Barry can, he remembers stuff from like all of the times that the DC universe has been like screwed with.
Yeah.
And it's like screwing with his mind because he remembers things happening that didn't happen within the universe he exists in.
Right, yeah, that's all revealed initially in the button.
Okay. So they're spinning the story that's in the Flash right now must be spinning onto the events of that directly. Then interesting.
It seems to be, yeah. And that gave us our last remnants of Flashpoint, which was really kind of cool. We get kind of a follow up to Flashpoint where there's this little pocket where, because importantly, Flashpoint isn't another universe. It's a pave over of our universe that was then paved over again. and there's a real distinction there, and it somehow, or rather technobabble whatever, managed to exist briefly in like this time pocket, and at the risk of giving too much away, in the button we finally pop that bubble. And so you get to see Thomas Wayne interact with Batman, and it feels kind of weighty because it's supposed to be the end of that whole universe, and the last time we'll see that character. Now I don't think it will be because of how comics work, but at least in those 4 issues, I thought it was really well handled.
Yeah, I mean, I'm usually not a fan of like the meta in universe like. This is how we're gonna band-aid continuity stories, but like I've seen them done well before, and like
sure.
Like the stuff they're doing in the Flash is interesting because it's informing the way the character is behaving rather than just being all about like the universes are colliding and these are the continuity things we're picking and choosing. Well, exactly.
I mean, that's what I liked about the button. And a lot of people didn't like that story, and it's not great or anything, but it is more character driven than you would expect. And I think it's really classy because they continue to kind of acknowledge in the books what didn't work about 52.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, I mean, of what I'm reading at DC, granted, I'm like 2 issues into both of the books, and I jumped in at issue 25, full disclosure.
Yeah.
I'm liking them. I read those 2 Flash issues, and I enjoyed them, 25 and 26, and I bought Aquaman 26 today, because it just came out the day we're recording this. And I haven't read it yet, but like the first issue was really great. It's classic Atlantis political infighting drama kind of stuff that I liked with Peter David, and then Jeff Johns after that. The kind of stuff that I like to see in my Aquaman book. So I think DC has been successful in returning to like the spirit and what people like about their characters, and I don't know. I think. I had said this about DC when like the 52 was going on, where like they seemed like they were afraid of the legacy of their characters, but they're like, our characters aren't cool enough, so we need to like make them updated for the 21st century, and we need to like speak to a new demographic of readers. So they need to be like gritty and realistic and stuff. I feel like the tables have turned now, where like Marvel is like, like all of our old characters, we're gonna replace them. Maybe it's I don't think it's that they're like they think their characters are outdated or anything, because I haven't really seen anyone say things like that, or like that hasn't been like the point of like replacing all of them. It's just been like, well, like maybe maybe these characters are played out. Maybe they're right about that. I mean, I don't know.
Well, and
because I've said that about Spider-Man for a while. Like, it seems like they don't have any interesting stories left to tell with that character without letting him grow and change. I feel like they've regressed that character and haven't done anything interesting with him in like decades. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's some truth to that. Who knows?
And that is, of course, the difficulty, and we've talked about this a lot, with starting from a place of, well, let's tell novels in comics where, yes, it's serialized, but everybody changes and grows and gets older, albeit at a, much slower rate than real time. And we've gotten to a point, especially in the last 3 decades or so, where Marvel's not real afraid to retcon characters that just aren't what they were at their classic days, and they know they can sell more comics by trying to artificially make the status quo feel like it did when they were in their heyday. Don't you think there's some truth to Marvel and DC having the same problem that movies and video games have, where the grass is always greener? Movies want to be video games want to be movies. I think that's often true of DC and Marvel.
Yeah, I mean, Frank Miller, specifically with like the movie comparison, talks about how like a lot of what he saw in the comic book industry when he was there was like comic books as an industry believing they were like the deformed stepchild of film. But he thinks that comic books sort of have in general have an inferiority complex about like what the medium is able to accomplish, and some of the things it does better than film, and vice versa.
Well, I guess what I mean is that the two companies look at each other and think they need to be more like each other, and so then you end up with these really bizarre inversions and things where they kind of forget where they came from. And so, you have at a lot of different points, you'll have places where Marvel decides it's got to look more bombastic and over the top and iconic, like you think about DC's characters classically, and then DC almost uncannily, almost at exactly the same time as Marvel will try to be them, they'll try to be Marvel, and they'll try to have their characters be more flawed and jaded and change and grow a lot more. And it's and there's a midpoint with both of those things where they can both land on and still be what they've always been, I think. And sometimes they do sometimes they do an okay job of finding that, sometimes they don't, but they never both do it at the same time. And that's where we're at with Rebirth right now, where there's a lot of things in Rebirth that you could say are kind of Marvel-y. New Superman is a Spider-Man book, through and through. And it's great, and it's a book that can't go on forever. Of course, it's not popular enough to go on forever, so it's got that going for it.
Yeah.
But that book, I mean, like, that's a coming of age story, and when it's over, that guy probably shouldn't have his own ongoing book for too much longer. I wouldn't think. Although him as an adult could be interesting, I don't know. I'm just saying that I think DC is doing a better job right now of figuring out how to aim its books for more modern, sophisticated taste, where people want their stories to be complex and they want their characters to be relatable, but at the same time not lose its sense of grandeur and its sense of iconography. And Marvel right now, I think their biggest mistake, besides just trying to put their finger too much on the pulse instead of just telling good stories that they want to tell, I think the mistake they're making, Dan, is they're trying to go back to certain heydays and repeat like tones that worked. So the fact that they're calling that right now, and this is going to change pretty soon, but the fact that right now they're still calling themselves Marvel now is real indicative of that. Like that was so successful, it seems like they were so unsure of themselves they had to go back and use that branding again.
Well, and when we were reviewing comics every week, Marvel Now was like my favorite thing in the entire world.
It was brilliant, and it's one of the best stints they've ever had.
Yeah, like I was reading so many Marvel books, everything was firing on all cylinders. All of my favorite characters had great runs going on, except for Doctor Strange because he didn't have a book. But like, I was loving Bendis on X-Men. I was loving Wade on Hulk at the beginning, at least. Yeah. I was loving Wade's Daredevil. I guess Slott's been on Spider-Man forever, so I can't say I love that, but like all of my characters barring Spider-Man and Doctor Strange.
Silver Surfer started during that, and that's one of my favorite things still to this day.
There
were a lot of great things, and not much that didn't work, and things that, I mean, when when they're really on top of their game, the best problem they have is there's too many books, and there's too many good books, and I don't have enough money in my wallet.
Mm-hmm.
And Marvel doesn't. Marvel right now has too many books.
Yeah, they do. And I feel like I look at their entire line, and I'm reading all of the books that interest me. Like, I bought the first issue of Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, because I was like, they put out a new Spider-Man book. It's not written by Dan Slott. This is probably for the people like me that don't like Slott Spider-Man. I read it, and I thought it was garbage. I hated it. I thought it was terrible.
Well, and again, you are still buying Star Wars in trade.
Yes, I am. So, like, that stuff is pretty good. It varies from really great to pretty good. Captain Logan said the new Darth Vader book is terrible.
I don't like it.
Which is...
I'm hearing polarized opinions about that book. I also think that it's written very prequel-y, and there are people who like the prequels, so I'm sure that doesn't bother some folks as much as it does me. But I also don't like the art in that book. Some of it's a taste issue. Some of it is I don't think it's real well written, and I think Soule is really strangely hit or miss. Because I think he's a really good writer when you put him on the right things, but I think he's kind of hit or miss. And Dan, you and I reviewed that first Daredevil arc. I mean, like, he takes a bit to get going sometimes.
He does. I wasn't crazy about the first arc on Daredevil, and now, like, I jumped onto the most recent issue, and I think it's brilliant. I think it's fantastic.
You have to read the issue before it. I think that's one of the best issues of anything this year. If I do a top 10, it'll be on it.
I'm really enjoying how, because he was an attorney, so he, like, knows how the legal system works. I'm loving.
I've been waiting for him to bring that stuff in.
Yeah, it's so cool. Like, the villainous lawyer that used to work for Tony Stark that the Kingpin hires is such an interesting character. His view on the law, and basically for people who aren't reading it, he views the law as something that doesn't have a definitive take on anything. It's just a tool that can be used for an attorney that's skilled enough to argue for his case, and, like, it doesn't matter what side you take on the law when you're arguing it. If you're good enough, you can bend it to your will. And obviously that's the complete opposite of what Matt Murdock believes. Like, he believes, like, in definitive versions of justice and things like that. So, like, putting those two characters against each other in a courtroom is really interesting, especially, like, since the story is all about, like, Daredevil testifying in court himself too. Like, oh, it's great stuff. I wish all of Marvel's books were that great, but you can't have everything, I guess.
Yeah, and again, I mean, kind of the point of this video is just to complain about things we're not liking in comics right now, but which probably sounds really negative for us, but just consider this an hour-long rant about things that aren't working for us in comics right now. But again, I want to be really clear. There's a lot of stuff in Marvel that I am liking, but they tend to be more of the peripheral books. The big giant events that they're doing, and I mean, we'll see what happens as they're rebranding again, but, like, the big events and the major tentpole books have not been the things I've been reading. Like you say, you're reading all the things that are interesting you. I think there are 2 or 3 books I'm reading that I could hand you an issue of and you would probably love, but you would never think to pick them up in the first place.
Right. Yeah. And there are some things that I've heard about, like, that I've been interested since the beginning, but just haven't gotten into. Like, Spider-Gwen is something I want to sit down and read at some point. Yeah.
It gets real meandering.
Does it? No, yeah. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, I like it again now. I keep going back and forth. Every time I try to drop it, important things finally happen.
And the same thing with Miles Morales Ultimate Spider-Man. Like, I want to eventually read the rest of that and probably read it in trade, because that, like, Bendis is real slow in issues sometimes, especially, and that book was one of them.
Yeah, and in that book more than anything that I've read from him is that way, and it's finally picking up again. I've really enjoyed the last couple issues quite a bit, but I was on the verge of dropping in, except I've been buying Miles Morales since it started, so I can't bring myself to drop it.
Right. And like, I'm actually really impressed with the first 3 issues of Defenders so far. It's weird that I didn't remember I was reading that book, because that's one of my favorites of the one I'm reading, oddly enough. I think that book feels like a proper AAA Marvel book. Like, Dave Marquez's art on it is fantastic. Bendis is top notch, writing all these characters that, like, I think Iron Fist is the only one that he hasn't, like, had a definitive, like, character defining run on. So yeah, like, getting all of those characters in a room is it's so good.
But they're all characters he's written and done things with before.
Yeah, well, I don't think he's really done anything with Iron Fist, but the other 3 definitely.
No, well, yeah. I thought that too, but somebody mentioned that Iron Fist is in his Avengers or some team book.
Oh, interesting. I didn't realize
so
that.
He hasn't done a lot with him, but he has put his fingers on Iron Fist before.
I mean, I guess you could say that about like every Marvel character, though. Like, what Marvel character hasn't Bendis touched at this point in some capacity, right? I mean, he's written pretty much all of them.
Yeah, but that's easy to say when you get to events and things. But I'm just saying that like in a book with a limited number team, if Iron Fist is on it, you can count that as he's done things with that character.
I don't know, man. Like, his Avengers team got pretty big. Like, almost everyone in the Marvel Universe was on it at some point, yeah.
Well, I didn't read it past the first arc. I read the Illuminati stuff, and then I didn't read past that.
Oh, okay. But yeah, like, when Romita was drawing that book, and like later on, like everyone and their mother was on the Avengers at some point. Aunt May probably joined.
I'm just saying, I made the mistake of saying what you said earlier, and somebody corrected me on it really hard and was like, no, he's dealt with that character, so.
Well, yeah, I think he was on one of the Avengers teams. I don't know, like, you can say, like, having Iron Fist on a team and writing dialogue for him in a fight is like writing a character-defining run in the same way you did with Daredevil and Jessica Jones and Luke Cage, you know?
It's nothing like Luke Cage and Jessica Jones, naturally.
That's all I'm saying. Like, he's...
What's really nice about Defenders is that it's paced like a normal comic book.
Yeah, it is.
We're crazy, 3 issues in, and I feel like we're 3 issues in, and I really appreciate that about that book.
Yeah, and the cool thing about it is they're double shipping it so that they can, most likely, so that they can get like a trade out before. Or does the TV show come out? Late August?
Yes, I think like mid-August. I think it's either the week of the 18th or the 25th. I forget. But I didn't realize they were double shipping. I thought it just landed that way the first 2 issues. But is it actually double shipping?
I mean, it's been double shipping so far. From when I looked at the dates of when the issues came out, I don't know if they're going to slow that down after the TV show premieres.
Okay.
Because I would imagine what they're doing is, putting the issues out so they can get a trade paperback in the stores for people to pick up that are interested in that team.
Yeah, you might be right
after they watch
that.
the TV show. But yeah, I mean, I'm really optimistic about Bendis in that book because Bendis. I think the last thing I really read by him that felt like really authentic, wonderful, one of my favorite writers in comics, Brian Michael Bendis, was his early All New X-Men stuff. I think that was like the last thing.
Yeah. No, I think you're right about that. Well, and I mean, like, I'm reading Jessica Jones, and it's great.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't really have much interest in that character, so I've never really thought to look at that stuff. But yeah. I'm sure because that's ostensibly his character. Like, he provided all the interesting things about her.
Yeah, well, and like Luke Cage is real heavily involved in that book, and there's plenty of reasons to read that other than the fact that it's a Jessica Jones book. And Bendis tends to cross a lot of his stuff over, of course. So when I'm reading a couple Bendis books, it's difficult not to read most of them. Because Bendis has a pocket in the Marvel Universe. Whatever it is, it's never the same pocket. But when whatever period you're looking at, when Bendis is writing, if he has more than a couple of titles, it will start to sort of feel like he's the Joss Whedon of his pocket of the Marvel Universe.
Are you telling me Riri Williams and Miles Morales are going to join the Defenders soon?
No, but I mean, they show up in other books and each other's books and stuff. Here and that.
I wouldn't be surprised if those 2 characters show up in the Defenders at some point.
Oh yeah, that seems kind of inevitable. We were talking about original X-Men characters earlier, and Marvel trying to be careful not to let Fox have things they don't want them to have. That makes me wonder if we're ever going to get to see Gold Balls anywhere, because I love Gold Balls. And I want him to be in a Spider-Man movie, because right now the status quo, and I mean, let's face it, a lot of things about Homecoming are just more modern Ultimate Spider-Man with Peter Parker instead of Miles Morales. I would love to see him move in with Peter and Gank at some point. I mean, I know that they're in high school right now and they're not doing the dorm thing, but I'd love to see that trio on film. Because it's great in the Miles Morales book, and I realize that Peter Parker isn't Miles Morales, but, like, I don't know, Gold Balls is a lot of fun, and I think it would be cool to put him in that high school.
That'd be really funny, although you're probably going to have to bite the bullet, and he'll probably have to be an Inhuman in that.
Oh, well, then never mind, I don't want that. We can't have that. We just can't have nice things. Dan, it's not okay. I want to mention we're just talking about stuff that's not working in Big Two right now, but this started as a conversation about things that Dan's reading and not reading, and I should say it's really nice that you're back reading at least some things, Dan, because I miss talking comics with you at all. Because we don't get to do as much of that just since you haven't kept up. And
yeah, and like when the comics I'm reading are things that like I read in trade that wouldn't necessarily interest you. Like I'm reading Stanley and Jack Kirby's run on Thor right now, but like that's not really in your purview of things like you're dying to read or like would pick up on a whim. So like I could talk to you about it, but you'd be like, oh well, I don't know what you're talking about, you know.
Well, I mean, you got me into the assignments and stuff. I'm not disinterested in where some of that stuff came from. That's interesting historical conversation. But I'm just saying, like, you and I used to talk industry stuff a lot. And
yeah,
like current industry, and of course we had our live show for a long time, and I kind of missed that. But I should mention that I read as much stuff outside of DC and Marvel these days as I do DC Marvel, strangely, and I think I have sometimes almost as many IDW books as I do Marvel books, which is just wild and crazy. But you at some point have got to get caught up on Ninja Turtles because it remains really good. I think it's fallen off a little bit the last few issues, and I hope it doesn't continue to fall off. But some of that it's funny though, because some of that is because they're doing things that I think would interest you that don't me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because Waltz is doing a lot of stuff with like Black Ops, government agents going after mutates, and I just could not care less.
That's interesting.
But I think you'd probably like some of that stuff. It's not badly done. I just don't care.
That's really funny. I wouldn't have expected that book to go in that direction after all the like heavy feudal Japan stuff. I thought they would. I mean, maybe they from what I didn't read, they concluded that stuff, and that's what they moved on to now. But yeah, I loved Turtles when I was reading it. It was always one of my favorite things to come out. But like now that there's 2 Turtles books, and I'm so far behind, I'm kind of like I kind of just want to like catch up on it in trade eventually.
Oh no, I'm not saying you should get back into it right now in issues, but I hope at some point you'll buy the trades and catch up because
I would like to for sure.
It remains great.
I mean, it's by far my definitive version of those characters for sure.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah, and I think one of the very, very best things they've done in that you missed the Donatello Metalhead stuff was really, really good. And
he's my favorite turtle. I'm kind of sad I missed that.
You would potentially tear up reading that stuff, but then when you get into the Ninja Turtles universe book, and the nice thing about that book is it's the side stuff instead of they're doing the micro series, but every now and again they actually do go back to the Turtles. It's not always just peripheral characters. And sometimes they'll do things that should have been in the main book. And one of those is the was it called Metalhead? I forget. But there's a 2-part story where Metalhead has they do the kind of, I say typical, but it's really well handled. They do the kind of typical does a robot have a soul story with Metalhead, and
cool.
Metalhead still has they didn't do this on purpose, but they find out that he still has Donatello's brain patterns in him and his personality, and he thinks he's still Donatello trapped in a robot, but Donatello is in his own body. So now there's 2 Donatello personalities running around.
Oh, that's interesting.
And through the course of just 2 issues, he becomes his own person, but he's like terrifying.
Oh, interesting.
And
that's kind of cool.
It's like what happens if Donatello and you and I have talked about his philosophy and how he's kind of a utilitarian, and he's got this kind of like pacifist to a fault thing going with him, and they take that to Metalhead, and he is trapped in this body and doesn't get to live the full human experience, and he can't eat, and he kind of goes nuts, and it's great.
That's really interesting. Wow, that's cool. Yeah, I definitely want to check that stuff out. I was reading some stuff like that I would like to catch up on eventually too.
Yeah.
From some of the indie presses, like Image. I was reading Ed Brubaker spy series called Velvet that was really great.
Yeah.
So like there's some other stuff like outside of superhero stuff I would like to read and get caught up on, because like all of my favorite creators that used to work at Marvel work at Image now. Like, I'm sure what Rick Remender has been doing there since he left Marvel is fantastic, but I just don't hear about it because it's, you know, Image and not as many people read those books.
Yeah. So I'm stoked that you're back reading some stuff.
Yeah.
And I hope, you know, I hope some of this Marvel stuff gets a little bit better now that you're back. Because again, I gotta reiterate, there's great stuff there. It's just not the stuff they're selling me the hardest, and it's disappointing because I'm a mainstream guy and I want to be reading. And it's unfair to say Spider-Man because Spider-Man's been in that place for us going way back now.
Yeah.
But like, I want to be reading Spider-Man. I want to be reading X-Men. I'm gonna try that new Soul book. You read the first issue and said it was good. I haven't been to the story yet.
Yeah, there's a really cool cliffhanger at the end that could have major repercussions for the X books. I won't spoil for anyone listening or Captain Logan because he hasn't picked it up yet at the store. But yeah, I was really intrigued by it. And in the letters pages of the first Astonishing X-Men issue, it said that it's a maxi series because Soul wanted to tell this like big epic X-Men story, but there wasn't really any place for it in any of the ongoing books. And that's kind of exciting to me that Marvel is just kind of like allowing this guy to tell a story as long as he needs to tell it with whatever characters he wants. Like, there's a very specific roster that's established in the first issue, and he has really great voices for all of them. So yeah, I'm really excited about it.
That's super cool. I just wish. I just think it's sad that the one X title that sounds really appealing to me since Bendis wasn't even meant to be in the first place and isn't an ongoing and is arguably a bigger writer right now than those other two, although I don't know if that's fair. I don't know if it's fair to say Bun and Hopeless aren't as
I feel like Hopeless's book is probably pretty good, and I've heard decent things about it because it's the same.
Too. I'm just tired of Inhumans being mixed in with my X-Men, but maybe his book doesn't do that. I forget whose book does that.
I'm not sure which one does. I'm sure it's pretty good, at least because he's writing the same characters he was in X-Men Season 1 largely, and everyone says that's fantastic. I haven't read that, but I've heard it's really good. And then Guggenheim's doing the other book, and I am not a Guggenheim fan, so I was not interested in that. I just want the original 5 X-Men to go home now. Like,
yes!
That's weird. Why I don't want to read that book. Why are they still here? That's another thing. I don't know did we mention this in the recording of this video, or was this before?
I think it was before we were recording, and then I have got to get going.
Oh, okay.
but go ahead, and then this could be the last thing we talk about, because like I said, folks, we did this real impromptu, and I actually have to go pick up Eric from work. So.
Okay, so like there are way too many like alternate versions of characters running around.
Yeah.
Like there is every version of Wolverine running around except for the actual like Wolverine from the main continuity. There's like 3 of them. There is Old Man Logan, there is X-23 Wolverine, and then there's like the Jeff Loeb son of Wolverine from Ultimate X something. Like when they relaunched the Ultimate Comics line as Ultimate Comics whatever it was, and this was the series after the original Ultimate Spider-Man series, they rebooted it as Ultimate Comics Spider-Man #1, and that was the series that Peter Parker was killed in. So like around that time when they were relaunching the Ultimate line for the first time, and there was this like Wolverine character that Jeff Loeb was writing. I didn't care to read it because it was Jeff Loeb, and it didn't look interesting. But that character is on Dennis Hopeless's X-Men team now, apparently.
But yeah, no, there's 4 because there's also the one in Spider-Gwen.
Yeah, so there's 4 of them running around.
Yeah.
I
mean, he hasn't shown up in our universe yet, but that could happen. That might be inevitable. I mean, because Spider-Gwen jumps back and forth all the time, and they did a pretty good crossover last year between the 3 Spider-Women books where they went to each other's universes. So like that will probably happen.
I would just like to see, instead of like all these alternate versions of the characters, like I would like to, because it pains me not to be reading some of the characters that are my favorite. Like, I really want a Bruce Banner Hulk book. Like, Amadeus Cho can be Hulk. That's perfectly fine with me, as long as, like, Bruce Banner is also the Hulk and I can read about him. Like, I don't know. You know? It
would have been really funny, though, if instead of getting rid of some of those characters and killing them off and, finding... putting them in comas and burying them alive, and I'm kidding. I don't think we did that with anybody. But, well, I guess Iron Man's in a coma. But I was going to say, it would have been really funny, Dan, if just everybody, like Tony Stark, was just a hologram talking to someone.
I think that's kind of what's going on with Amadeus Cho and Bruce Banner. Like, cause he always I don't know that he's a hologram, but he like is always like, Bruce told me to do this, and I don't know where he's getting this information.
Oh,
because I've read like previews of it and stuff.
Because that's what they're doing with Riri and Tony Stark. Is that like Tony's in a coma, but he's her AI.
And you get an AI, and you get an AI.
Yeah, I don't know. It would be hilarious.
I don't think he's an AI. I'm probably exaggerating, but like, it's just frustrating to me, especially with the Hulk, because I'm a huge Hulk fan. He's one of my favorite superhero characters of all time. Love the character. I have read like the definitive stories of the character that have been printed, as I talked about with Peter David's run. They haven't reprinted it all yet because it's so dang long. But Bruce Banner has not been the Hulk for the majority of the time I've been reading current comics. So it's like, guys, come on, like, give me a Bruce Banner book to read, please. I will give you my money. Just make the Hulk, please.
Real quick before I go, I meant to mention this earlier, way back at the beginning of this conversation, when you mentioned Captain Marvel. I do think she does have potential staying power.
I mean, I suppose. It's just like, no ill will towards the people that like reading her book and stuff, but like they've tried to reboot that series like 4 times with a new #1 to get it a sales boost, and it just isn't happening. You know what I mean?
Is that the problem, or does it just get a #1 like everything else does? I didn't realize they were having a hard time selling that.
I mean, when I was reading it, they gave it a #1 when she got the mantle, and then after Kelly Sue DeConnick left, they rebooted it. Regardless of what they were doing with the line, I believe. I think it was like even before they relaunched everything, and she's had like other ones that have coincided with some of the relaunches and stuff too. But
yeah, but she's also in, and I don't know how artificial this is, but I mean like she shows up in a lot of other things and seems to be a kind of a major player and major mainstay right now. I didn't like Civil War II at all, and I thought she was thrown as under the bus as I thought Tony Stark was in the original Civil War. But she's in Ultimates and Ultimate Squared, and I like her there.
And she's the head of the new Alpha Flight,
yeah.
which doesn't resemble anything like Alpha Flight was before.
It's weird that that's what they named it, but the idea of that Alpha Flight is really cool.
It's just Sword again. It's just like the Space Avengers.
No. It's different. It's a think tank. It's a space think tank.
They don't fight things. They just think.
Well, at least okay. So Alpha, I guess I'm conflating some things. Alpha Flight maybe sometimes does fight some things, but that's where Ultimates is, and it's a think tank. And I just kind of think of them together now because that's where they are. Like Ultimates is like mixed in with Alpha Flight.
Interesting.
I don't know. I don't think you would think that was as silly if you were reading it, but.
Potentially. I have zero interest in any of the characters on that team, so I'm all set.
Well, I had to read it because of Galactus, and what they've done with Galactus is fascinating.
That's interesting.
And awesome. Yeah, it's great and totally works. And they just did a really cool thing in that book with Galactus and Ego the Living Planet. And they did a really cool comparison contrast thing between those characters and kind of made them, at the end, they made a really good argument for there being the same character, and it's great.
Interesting.
So yeah, there are some really cool little pockets of things in the middle of things that don't sound necessarily appealing at first glance. You have to really dig right now to find the best stuff.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because I'd like to be able to read stories that are great about the characters I want to read about, but like, I guess if you have to dig.
Well, I'm with you, but like, I guess I'm saying you, and also somewhat proverbial you, but I mean, like, I didn't dig. I bought Ultimates because Galactus was on the front. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I am buying books about characters I love. They're just different characters than you love, and because more of my favorite Marvel characters are like peripheral secondary things, they didn't get rid of them all and replace them with other characters.
Yeah, exactly.
I've always had to read other people's books to get Galactus.
Yeah, I mean, but like, he's a villain. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I could be reading Amazing Spider-Man because I like Green Goblin, but like that book is terrible right now and has been for like years. So like,
but I'm weird with Marvel. I've always read Marvel more for villains.
That's totally fair. Marvel does have a great gallery of rogues,
and also Marvel is really into making villains, giving villains their own books right now. So I get.
And if you're an X-Men villain, you will get converted to Xavier's cause at some point in your career.
It will happen. Yeah. Well, anyway, we should probably get going, but thanks as always for listening, folks, and leave your comments. Tell us what books you're reading that you think are really cool right now, and also how you feel about Marvel and DC's business models right now. I don't mean to, and like we were talking more about Marvel than anything because that's where Dan lives. I didn't mean to just completely gush about Rebirth. It's not, well, and I complain about Superman. It's not all good. There are some mistakes being made there, and I alluded to this earlier, but one of the big problems they have right now is too much 90s nostalgia. But they're banking on some of that way too hard. But by and large, I like company-wide just kind of the flavor of it.
Yeah, and I'm going to reserve judgment about the Watchmen thing because I'm kind of against that in principle, but we'll wait to see what they actually do with it.
Yeah, we don't have any information yet.
Yeah, like if they bring the Watchmen into the main DC universe and like do that, I don't know.
Well, and that sets a weird precedent because there are just other things I wouldn't want to see that happen with.
Yeah, exactly. Like imagine reading like an ongoing Rorschach title. Like what? I don't know if there's anything left to say with that character. I don't know.
I agree with you. Well, anyway, thanks again for listening, folks. We'll see you later on. And Dan is going to be at Geekvolution headquarters next week, so look forward to some live and in-person videos. Not live. We might do a stream. I'm not sure, but live as in he'll be on camera with me and Eric, and we're very excited about it.
Yeah, I can't wait. We're going to be recording oodles of videos for you guys to enjoy, and hopefully they come out pretty okay.
We'll do our level. We're not going to let Dan get a wink of sleep while he's here. That's the whole plan. Anyway, thanks for listening.
Bring me a pot of coffee at the beginning of each day. I'll be fine.
I am Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
We'll see you next time. Bye, folks.
Bye.